Hi everyone, it's Mary from Joyful and Mary Quilting, and today we are going to make a jelly roll bento box quilt block. And we're going to do it together in just a few easy steps. You know, this block is one of my favorites. It looks bold and dimensional, but you know what? Actually, it's very simple to make. In this tutorial, I'll walk you through each step, and by the end, you're going to have a complete 12.5 inch by 12.5 inch block ready to go. We will be using an entire jelly roll, 40 strips for the scrappy version, or we'll use a half a jelly roll, only 20 strips, along with a background fabric that is of really good contrast to those strips for the 3D version. As you can see in the 3D version behind me, I cut my background fabric into 20 2.5 inch by width of fabric strips, and I specifically chose 20 of the 40 jelly roll strips that are of high contrast to my background fabric. Now, not every full jelly roll has 20 perfect pairs of high contrast fabrics, as you can see in the quilt behind me, especially this block. You can kind of see it here, the purple and the green, different colors, but they actually don't have a lot of contrast, but that's okay. Some blocks may have more subtle contrast, and that really gives the quilt a scrappy look. But keep in mind, if a few strip pairs just don't work, just leave them out and swap in fabrics from your scrap bin. This is a quick and beginner-friendly block that comes together beautifully, and you can easily tailor it to your theme or your style, depending on the jelly roll fabrics that you choose. If you'd like to make the entire throw-sized quilt, which finishes at 60.5 by 72.5 inches, you'll find a link to purchase the full quilt pattern in the video description below. Now, if you've already purchased your pattern, keep it close by for reference and follow along with me step by step as we create our blocks together. So let's get started on this fun quilt block. This is the block that we're going to be doing. This is our bento box quilt block made from jelly roll strips. I've selected 2 jelly roll strips here. The collection that I used in the quilt behind me is Riley Blake, and it is the B Dots collection. I just love it. It has a really good contrast with most of the fabrics. You can see there are a couple of squares where the fabrics blend together a little bit more, but it still really works. Now, in addition to the jelly roll that you'll be using, you also want to make sure that you have a pressing surface and your iron set to high setting, a rotary cutter, your rulers. I like to use a 6.5 inch as I'm squaring up my quadrants, a 2.5 by 12.5 when I'm actually cutting my strips. I also use my 12.5 by 12.5 inch when I finish and I'm squaring up the block. Now, here's my jelly roll strips for this block that we're going to do. I also am going to use a pressing marker for my seams. If you're not familiar with pressing markers, they really are helpful in flattening out your seams. I have a video on that. You can click on the link. I also am going to use my wool pressing bar. You don't have to, but a couple of the seams we're going to be pressing open, and I think this works really well to keep them nice and even. I also like to use these mega clips by Sewing by Sarah. They're called Alpha Clips Mega, and they work really well to just clip together my strips so that I can keep them in order. So I'm using these as well. We're going to begin with our jelly roll strips. Now, you should have taken your jelly roll and divided it into 20 pairs. Usually jelly rolls come 40 in a jelly roll. So you divide them into 20 pairs. You want a light and a dark, or a light and a medium, or a medium and a dark. You want some good contrast between the 2 strips that you will put in each pair. Again, as I said, we do our best. Sometimes in a jelly roll, we don't have an even number of 20. You can always go to your scraps or your fabric stash and pull out a couple of strips to add to it if need be, if the block isn't going to be as 3D as you would like. As you can see in the quilt behind me, there are a couple of blocks where even though the colors are different, the value is the same, and that causes a little bit of blending. I didn't really mind that because I wanted to use the whole jelly roll strip, but if that bothers you and you want to have every one with good contrast, then you'll want to go ahead and add to your jelly roll as needed. So let's start out. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut our strips. What I have done is I've gone through all of my strips and I've put a light with a dark and I've pinned them together. That way that part is already done and I'm ready to cut. So you're going to take your 2 strips and you're going to lay them just on top of each other. Keep them folded. You don't want to unfold them. It just makes cutting a little bit easier. There's 4 layers here that can easily be cut using a standard rotary cutter. So I've lined them up. Now, these actually I cut from yardage because I already used up my jelly roll. But if you take a look at a jelly roll strip, for the most part, most of them have this little pinked edge here, and that can cause some problems on occasion. What can happen is sometimes they're not cut exactly 2.5 inches wide, which can be a problem and need some trimming. Also, everyone always wants to know, where do we measure? The top of the pinked edge or inside the little valley of the pinked edge? What we do is we measure the top. So you want your ruler butted up against the top edge and the top edge. Now this is a Moda jelly roll and it's cut very accurately, so I'm not even going to worry about it. But if you do have one that's not quite right, unless it's majorly off, I would not trim it yet. You'll be trimming along the way as you assemble your block. You can do the trimming then. It just gives you a little bit of wiggle room if need be. So don't worry about it. You just want to make sure that as you are assembling your block that all of your measurements are accurate. So let's start with our first set. And I'm going to remove my pin, and I have the fold on this end and I have the selvage edge down on the opposite end to my right. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off that fold. And I'm just going to place my ruler, maybe about 1/8 of an inch from the fold and then cut it off. That way I've got a nice clean edge here and I can start to cut my strips. What you are going to need, we are going to get 10 rectangles out of each strip. So the first one we'll need, now remember we've got 4 layers, 2 and 2. The first we need is a 6.5 inch. So place my 6.5 inch marking of my ruler right there. And I'm going to make a cut. So that's all we need of the 6.5 inch size. The next one we're going to cut is 4.5 inches. We'll need 2 sections of this. So I'm going to place my, remember you want to make sure that the line of your ruler is on the fabric. There's one, and then one more. Now, you might be a little tight depending on the jelly roll that you're using. You need 20.5 inches when the fabric is folded, when the strip is folded, in order to get all the rectangles and squares that you need. So just make sure that when you cut that fold off at the beginning, you just cut a teeny bit. You don't want to cut too much. As you can see, I have plenty here, but you never know. It depends on the manufacturer. The next one we're going to need is a 2.5 inch square. So we've got our 6.5 inch, 2 sections of 4.5 inch, and we'll need 2 sections of 2.5 inches. And we have plenty left over here to throw away, so we're good. Now we have all these together, and we have actually our darker fabric we're going to call fabric A, and our lighter fabric we're going to call fabric B. So I'm going to separate these out just to make it easier. And I'm going to put all of the same size rectangles together in a group. And then I'm going to clip them with my mega clips, or you can pin them with a little piece of paper with A and B on it, whatever you want to do. But I've got my A strips here and my B strips here. So now they are ready to go. We are going to assemble this block in 4 quadrants. As you can see, we have 4 quadrants here, 1, 2, 3, 4. Our quadrant 1 and quadrant 4 are identical. This just is flipped upside down. Then 2 and 3 are also identical. This one is flipped upside down. So we're going to make this one first, and then we're going to make this one, and then we're going to put them together. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start with quadrant 1. And for that quadrant, we need 2 fabric A squares. These are 2.5 inch squares, and 2 fabric B 2.5 inch squares. We are going to take those, we're going to put fabric A, the darker fabric, on the left, the lighter fabric on the right, and we're going to sew them together into a 2 patch. So we're going to put them right sides together. You can pin if you want. You don't have to. But as we go along, sometimes it's easier to put the pins in because it reminds you what side you're supposed to sew on. This one, it doesn't really make that much difference. So we're going to put this under the sewing machine and we're going to sew a 1/4 inch here and a 1/4 inch here, and then we are going to press toward the darker fabric. Now this is really important. You will always press toward the darker fabric, even if the majority of the section that you're putting together is actually lighter fabric. Wherever that darker piece is, you will press toward it. Keep that in mind as you go along. That's going to help you with nesting the block together in the end. So let's go ahead and sew our 1/4 inch seam down each side, and then we are going to press toward the darker fabric, fabric A. Okay, so we have sewn a 1/4 inch seam on our piece. Now I'm going to use my pressing marker. This is optional, but again, I just love the way that it makes my piece that much flatter. So I will paint a little line of pressing solution right on that seam, and then I am going to press toward the dark. Whatever piece you're pressing toward, that's the piece that goes on top. That makes it a little easier to remember. So since it's the dark, we have the dark on top, and we are going to press. Now you want to be careful too when you do this that you don't push it around too much, because you don't want to distort the piece. And when we're working with smaller pieces like this, that can happen. So we want to basically just press and not iron. And there I have my 2 pieces, and they're cut nicely. So yours should be looking like this if you're following along with me. Now what we need to do is we need our next piece for our quadrants 1 and 4, and that's going to go across the top, and it's going to be a dark. So dark is fabric A. I'm going to pull two pieces out, and then we're going to place these right sides together on top of the piece that we just made. Now this one I like to pin. The reason is because it's easy to get mixed up and sew on the wrong side. So what I'm going to do, since we know it's going to be looking like this, I'm going to make sure I put those pins in at the top so that I don't get my sewing line on the wrong side of the block. So I've got one there and one here. Remember, we're doing 2 quadrants at one time, quadrants 1 and quadrant 4. So now we're going to take this and we are going to sew a 1/4 inch seam right along that edge. But you'll want to look and see which side is the busiest. This one is busiest because it has a seam on it, and we want to make sure that when we sew that, and I'm going to actually move that so that it's nice and flush. When we sew that, we don't want this to get tangled up underneath. So we'll sew right along this edge, and we'll put this on top as we put it under our sewing machine. So go ahead and sew a 1/4 inch here, a 1/4 inch here, and then we are going to press that toward the dark fabric. Now since this piece is the larger piece and it's dark, this will go on top, and we'll press it in this direction using our pressing marker. So go ahead and sew that 1/4 inch seam along this edge. Okay, I have sewn along this edge, and I'm going to press toward the dark, the larger dark piece. Now we've got dark on this one too, but we want to press it toward the dark. So let's go ahead and mark that with our pressing marker. And we are going to press. And there we are ready now to add our next strip. And this is kind of a log cabin sort of thing. We're going to go around 2 sides, and we're going to create that optical illusion look, that 3D look to our block. So the next piece that we need is we need a piece on the left side, and that's going to be a light piece, a fabric B. And it's also going to be a 4.5 by 4.5 inch piece. So I'm going to take these 2, and I like to lay it out first just to make sure that I have it right, that I'm not adding it to the wrong side. And I'm going to put right sides together. Once again, I will pin this just to make sure that I'm adding it to the right side of the unit I've already created. Now we are going to sew right along this edge a 1/4 inch, just like we always do, and then we are going to press it toward the dark. this piece, not this one. So this one's a little confusing on this one. So go ahead and sew along that edge, and then we'll do our pressing. So there are the two pieces. We've pressed toward the dark. Now, what that means is when these are closed, before we do our pressing, we are going to lay this dark section on top, the lights underneath, and press this way. So that's how we get that pressed in this direction. So you want to make sure you do that for both pieces. And now we are ready to add our final strip to the top of the quadrant, and that one is also going to be a light strip so that we have that contrast going here. So we have a 6.5 inch in length, 2.5 by 6.5. We're going to place that here, place that here, pin in place, and then we're going to do the same thing, and that is what's going to complete our quadrant. And you'll want to pin it a little bit just to make sure that it doesn't wiggle when it goes underneath your machine. But we will, again, this is the busier side, so we're going to sew on that busier side. Now, you'll sew along the side, and then again, taking a look, this is light, so we are not going to press toward the light. We want to press toward the darker. So the darker side will be on the top, and we'll press in this direction. So go ahead and sew that 1/4 inch seam right down the edge. Place this on top when you put it on your pressing surface, and press in this direction. So go ahead and do that. And there I have our first two quadrants, quadrant 1 and quadrant 4, completed. Now you want to make sure that they are 6.5 inch square. Sometimes they can get a little off or a little bit wonky, and you can trim that off. For the most part though, this just really goes together well. If you've got your strips cut accurately, you can see 6.5, and I don't have to do any trimming at all. Sometimes I have to do a little bit, but these both look really good. So I'm going to set these aside. This is quadrant 1 and quadrant 4. Now we're going to do the same thing with our second set. So as I begin quadrant 2, I like to have my pattern because I have all of the directions, how everything is supposed to lay, and I don't make any mistakes when I do that. So I'm going to turn my pattern to quadrants 2 and 3. That's going to make up the second part of our block. So once again, we've got fabric A and fabric B. We're going to do the exact same thing we did with quadrants 1 and 4. We're going to sew these two pieces together and these two pieces together. Right sides together, sew that 1/4 inch, sew that 1/4 inch, and we're going to press, just like we did before, towards the darker fabric. So if you want to pin, you can go ahead and pin, and then go ahead and sew. Sew down the edge. So I have done that. I have my two patches sewn together, and I'm going to press toward the dark, which means I'm going to lay the dark on top. I'm going to use my pressing marker, mark that seam to get it nice and flat, and then I will press each one of those pieces. So now I have the center. We're started again. Now I look at my pattern and make sure that I have everything facing the right direction, because if you don't, it's not going to come out right. We want to make sure the dark is on the left, the light is on the right, and now we are going to add fabric B, the light rectangle, 2.5 by 4.5. We're going to put those right sides together, and again, this is where I like to pin because it is so easy, and I've done it, sewn it on the wrong side. So we want to pin the side we know we're going to sew, and then check it. Just open it up and say, yep, that looks right. It looks just like the diagram. Or if you're just watching the video and you don't have the pattern, you can look at the video and make sure that you've got everything going in the right direction. Not everybody needs to use the pattern, but I like the pattern. I like having a paper copy. So we are going to sew, and then I will show you how to press that once again in the same direction toward the dark. We have 2 light pieces and a dark, always toward the dark, even though there's only one. So the dark is going to be on top, and we'll press toward that. So go ahead and sew busy side up, 1/4 inch across there. Okay, I have these sewn. I'm going to use my pressing marker. I'm going to press, make a mark right across that seam allowance, and then I'm going to press toward the dark. Even though it's just one little dark square, we are still pressing toward the dark. All right, so now we have these 2. Okay, now this is where sometimes you might want to check, double check. I can see I've got a little edge sticking out there. Now maybe it's because I had a jelly roll strip that wasn't exactly right. So I'm going to lay this on here and just double check to make sure that everything is in good shape. And you know, it's pretty close here, so I'm okay. I'm going to make sure that when I sew, when I place my next piece, I allow for that little piece that's extra right along there when I place the next piece on. The next piece is going to be fabric A, the darker fabric, and I'm going to lay it so that everything, and you can see it better on this side. I'm just kind of making up for that little discrepancy right there. That's the way that, you know, you can easily, it's not huge. If it was 1/4 inch or even 1/8 of an inch, I think maybe I need to redo because I don't want to have such a small seam allowance. But when it comes to just a tiny bit like that, that's kind of a way that you can fudge it. If you have a jelly roll that's a little too large, this would be the time that you would trim off this square to 4.5 by 4.5. Mine was not, it was a little short, so that's why I'm laying it this way. So we've got one piece, and then we're going to do the same thing, make sure that everything's laying in the right direction, and I'm going to pin this piece. So 1/4 inch, and this time we will press toward the dark. So go ahead and do that. So there, I've done it. I've got pressed toward the dark. Everything looks good. Again, if you want to check it, we want to see I've got 6.5 wide, and I do, and I've got 4.5 in this direction. So it doesn't really need any trimming. Looks good. But if you do need to, this is the time to do it. All right, now our last one, just like we did before, we're going to take our 6.5 inch strip and lay it across the top. Double check and make sure that you have everything in the right direction. You've got your dark, your light, your dark, and then we're going to put a dark on the top. We're going to go ahead and pin that. And then when we sew that 1/4 inch, we will press toward this 6.5 inch dark strip. Now remember, on the quadrants 1 and 4, we had to press in the other direction because that was a light strip on the top. We are always pressing toward the dark. So let's get this all nice and pinned. And then go ahead and sew your 1/4 inch seam and press toward the dark. So you'll press this direction. This piece will be on top. So there I have it. I have my 2 quadrants finished, and I can assemble my block. So we're going to go back and get our quadrants 1 and 4. Remember, this is 2 and 3. And let's lay them out. We want to make sure that we've got the 4 patch in the center. That's going to be our key. So there we have 2. We want the opposite corners to match, opposite corners to match. And we are going to sew this one to this one, and this one to this one. Now this is where pinning is super important, because you want to make sure that you are able to nest your seams. Now what's nesting? It's because we have pressed our seams in opposite directions. That lets us just snug those seams up to each other, and we will have perfect intersections every time. Now you can see this is where the intersection is. I am making sure that it lays nice and flat. If I feel a bump in there, the seams are on top of each other. If I feel a space with my thumb, that means the seams are separate, and you're going to have an imperfect connection. We want to make sure those intersections are perfect. Then I'm going to diagonally pin. So I'm going to start with the pin poked down into both pieces to the right of the seam, and it's going to come up to the left of the seam. I'm going to do that twice, and the reason I do it twice is because when I remove the pins as I'm sewing, I like having the second pin still there to anchor it and nothing slips. I have one seam here and one seam here where I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to down on the right side, I can feel it, it's nice and nested. Up on the left side, and then down on the left side, and up on the right side. Now, if you want to put a pin at this end, that's a good idea. You don't really need one at the top because you're going to pull it out just as soon as you put it under your machine. Now, if you see, we've got these pieces here. There's no busier side. They both have seams on them. You just have to be careful when you go over this that you make sure that you don't have a problem with this getting tucked under. So we're going to go ahead and sew a 1/4 inch seam on this one. We're going to do the same thing with this one. We're going to pin it again just like we did before. And now these are the only two seams that we are going to press open. The other seams, as you can see, because of the nesting issue, they are all pressed to one side toward the darker fabric in that particular quadrant. So you want to make sure that when you actually sew these together, that you have all of your seams snug, and then you are able to then press things open. And that's where I use my pressing bar, and I'll show you how I do that. That's optional, just kind of a neat tip. Okay, so let's go ahead and sew a 1/4 inch here, a 1/4 inch here, and then I'll show you how to press. Okay, I have sewn a 1/4 inch on both sets. Now I am going to press this open. So I'm going to show you how I do that two ways. The first way is simply pressing on my pressing mat. You can just take your finger and go ahead and finger press this out. You can also use a little wooden pressing tool if you have one. That's helpful too. But you're going to do it just like that, and then I'm going to take my pressing marker. You don't have to, but I like to. And I'm just going to paint that inside right there. I'm going to place my iron down. And there, look at, I have a beautifully pressed seam. And look at those intersections. They are perfect. Right here and right here. So this is our top quadrant 1 and 2. Now I'm going to show you how to use the pressing bar. When I use the pressing bar, sometimes what can happen on this is these get a little wobbly just from pressing them open, and the pressing bar seems to keep that from happening. I was real careful with this one, so it worked out okay. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually put the solution on this before I put it on the pressing bar, because it just helps to relax it a little bit. Relaxes the fabric. Now this is a pressing bar. It's wooden, but it has this wool on the top of it. It's from a company called You&Me. It's a 12-inch pressing bar. It's available at Fat Quarter Shop. Now I'm going to just pull these open just like I did before, and you can see it just lays so nicely when I do this. And I can just place my iron right on top. And look at that, it's just perfect. It just comes out really well. You just wait till your pressing solution is dry. And then I give it another little press right here. Got some threads. And there I have the second half of my block completed. Now I'm going to take these two, same process. I'm going to put these together. But here's the thing, right here we want to make sure that these two go together. And we can't nest them. There's just no nesting here. So what you want to do is, and this is really important, you lay them as best as you can so that those two seams look like they're going to match up. Make sure that these edges match up, and then here's the key. You pull this back and see, is it exactly right? A little bit off there. That's exactly right. So now that I can see that that intersection is perfect, I'm going to take my cross pinning, and that's what's going to give me that intersection that's going to be just right. I'm going to go ahead, mark. I'm going to do my cross pinning just like I did before. And I want to make sure that everything is nested. Sometimes you can feel that maybe it's a little, it looks a little short, but it works out. Unless you've got a major deficit when it comes to the size, you made a big mistake, it's all going to lay flat and it's going to work out. I love the way this block comes together, and I love the way that it goes so quickly. I mean, I can get this done in no time. One block goes together fast, especially once you get going and you follow along on the pattern or with the video, whatever you decide to do. It works out really well, and you make those 20 blocks in no time and can put it together. The pattern also shows you how to do the border and how to calculate for that as well. So that's where it's also important. Now you're going to want to take and sew that 1/4 inch all the way along here. Okay, I have sewn my 1/4 inch seam, and now I like to peek and see, is everything good? And it is. Look at that. Everything matches up so perfectly. Now I will, you can see there's my center that I worked so hard to get. I'm going to do the same thing that I did before. I'm going to mark it with the pressing marker, and then I am going to press this seam open just like I did with the previous quadrant assembly. So you just want to make sure that those cross seams are pressed open. And there I have it. I am going to give it a good press, use some pressing solution on there to make it nice and stiff, and then I'm going to check and see if I need to do any trimming. The way that we square up the block is we want to find the middle of our ruler. This is a 12.5 inch square, so we know 6 1/4 is going to be halfway and halfway. So some of the newer rulers actually have that circle marked where the 6 1/4 is. Mine does not, but it's right there. And I'm going to take a look and look at this. I do not have to do any trimming at all. This block is absolutely perfect. Woohoo! That's always such a good feeling when that happens, isn't it? That's our first bento box block. Go ahead and make 19 more and then put it together in the quilt, and you're finished. And that's it. A fast, fun, and beginner-friendly block that's really perfect for jelly rolls or 2.5 inch strips from your stash. You can either go scrappy, or you can create a striking 3D effect just by choosing strips with strong contrast. Each fabric pair creates a swirling layered look, and a little contrast really does go a long way. If you've enjoyed this tutorial, click that like button and don't forget to subscribe for more quilting tips and block tutorials. And if you'd like to make the full 16.5 by 72.5 inch quilt, either the scrappy version or the 3D version, you can purchase the complete pattern using the link in the video description below. I'm always trying to be joyful, but I'll always be merry. Thank you for watching.